Evening, good morning, good night, wherever you may be, and welcome to another special edition of Open Up Live Talk Show here at A Voice of Men 360. Hello, my name is Dipchand Ramcharitar. I'm the Outreach and Development Coordinator at A Voice of Men 360. And just a little bit about Voice of Men 360 before we get to our special guest, Matt Ciaffoni, who is a secondary education specialist. So here goes with the tidbits about our organization. Voice of Men 360 is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 based in London, Ontario, Canada. Voice of Men 360 was born out of seeing a tremendous need and stepping up to provide services to help, support, and overcome men and boys' life challenges. Also, we are part of International Men's Day, who has been serving for over 21 years and more than 90 countries so far, joined together in doing various activities on behalf of the betterment for men and boys. They follow 6 pillars, which again is for the overall well-being of men and boys. And we here at Voice of Men 360 follow in the same footsteps. We also would like at this point to introduce our disclaimer for the show. We would like to remind you that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered with good faith towards peaceful harmony. The views, opinions expressed in today's episode and those of our speakers do not represent, let me repeat that. The views and opinions expressed in today's episode are those of our speakers and do not necessarily represent Voice of Men 360. Our organization engages in discussion forums to offer inspiration and create awareness of the issues of men who wish to overcome their life challenges. We are not providing medical assistance or therapeutic advice for that matter. Should you require that type of assistance, we recommend you contact a medical professional immediately. If you have any questions or concerns about today's episode or any Voice of Men 360 content, please email us at info@voiceofmen360.org. And again, we're excited to have a very special guest, Matt Ciaffoni. Welcome to the program, Matt.
Dipchand, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing excellent. How are you, sir?
Doing well. It's nice Sunday afternoon here.
Oh, in Portland, yeah. So it's very nice. You're 3 hours behind us. So, it's nice to have you on. And why don't we just dive right in? So my first question to you is, what influenced you to get involved with boys' issues at school?
So just a brief background. I've been in secondary education here in the United States, so high school, grades 9 through 12 for the last 20 years. And so, it's certainly been the focus of my professional career. I got interested in the topic on a informal level around, probably about like 2013, 2014 or so, when I just started noticing that when we do honors assemblies at the high school I was working at the time, that the vast majority of people who were getting honored, who had the honors grades, were girls. And at first, a colleague and I just kind of noticed, like, hey, like, I don't know, that's kind of strange. Like, of the, let's say, 35 kids who are being honored here, like 30 of them are girls. And so we just kind of started tracking some numbers on a more, kind of like intense level. I came across a book called Of Boys and Men a couple years ago by Dr. Richard Reeves. And in that, it just kind of opened my eyes a little bit further towards what's been happening regarding the struggles for boys in school, and looking at some possible ways of changing the system, or at least just kind of making people aware that it is an issue, that the data is pretty undeniable, that a lot of younger boys are struggling in school. So just kind of something I want to kind of keep following and seeing if there's maybe some ways of changing outcomes. And I always, when I get into this topic, I always like to emphasize that I am the proud father of 2 daughters. And so whatever I talk about, I'm very passionate about that. Whatever we're doing to try to help out the lives of young boys in school absolutely should not come at the cost of young girls. That, we should be sympathetic partners in this together, and that we can all try to improve the outcomes for everyone.
Absolutely. And we also here at Voice of Men 360, we emphasize that while we advocate for men and boys issues, and we seem to, not seem to, but we know that it's totally justified based on how society operates today. While we advocate for men and boys, we do not want that to come at a detriment for girls or women.
Mm-hmm.
So the two can coexist. It's not a zero-sum game.
Absolutely.
We're hoping that we can achieve what we aim to, and at the same time acknowledging the importance and of advocacy for women and girls where necessary. And we would want to see them rise up just as men and boys. So
yeah,
it's a win-win for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Is there anything, like, briefly in that book you mentioned that you consider really important that you'd want to share just briefly?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I noted with some of the topics that are on the plate for us to discuss. So like educational outcomes and some of the impacts that those are having on boys in their lives. Like, one of the things that stood out to me in the book, and there's a lot, but one of the things that stood out was what I would call for young men in the ages of 20 to 30, what I'll call kind of like just kind of a disengagement from society. That the rates of young men working are falling, the rates of marriage are falling, and it just seems to be kind of an overall like disengagement from what we'd kind of consider quote unquote traditional life. Kind of stood out, and there'll be others too that we'll address a little bit later on here in the show, but just kind of first one that popped into mind was that one.
For sure. And actually this might lead into the next question sort of naturally, which is, what impact is the education system for boys having on life outcomes?
So when you look at, and the stats I'm going to reference here are US based, so I just want to make sure emphasizing that certainly could be different.
Sorry, could you explain what that is? The US based, what is that?
Oh, so the data that I'm going to be using here is all drawn from schools based in the United States. So
I see. Okay.
In another country, it might look a little bit different. So here in the US, just looking at honor roll students, 2/3 of those right now are girls. If you look at literacy rates, by the time the average young boy gets to be about the age of 14, they're about a year behind in literacy rates. Their math scores are about equal, but when it comes to reading, writing, falling behind. Expulsion rates, boys are about 3 times higher to be expelled from school than what the average girl is. You can translate that too into college enrollment and completion. So right now in the United States, in terms of college enrollment and college completion, the same gap that existed, there's a law in the US called Title IX, which was a very, very big deal for the women's rights movement. So Title IX signed in, I think it's either 1972 or 1973. The gap that existed between men and women back then is exactly the same now, except for it's flipped, where enrollment for women is dramatically outpacing men, and completion is dramatically outpacing men there in school. So we have essentially the exact same discrepancy, just kind of flipped the opposite direction from that Title IX era. And for women, they essentially kind of had those artificial barriers that society had placed upon them lifted, and they flourished, and that's obviously great. Versus now, our men are, I won't say floundering, but it seems to be kind of stagnant when it comes to educational outcomes here. And then you also look at wages. A lot, at least in the U.S., like men's wages have largely been stagnant. Like a working class man essentially makes about the same as what he does if you adjust for inflation, about the same as what he did back in the 1970s. That wage is essentially kind of a flatlined. I mentioned young men not working. We have about 7 million younger men who are just not looking for work. They're not engaging with society. Health outcomes, suicide rates for men, overdose rates are dramatically higher than what they are for women, and obviously we'd like to see those come down. From about the year 2000 to, I heard this a couple months ago, from at least in the United States, we've essentially lost about the same number of people that the U.S. lost in World War II due to opioid overdoses. So we've lost about a World War II's worth of young men due to that. And so health outcomes are kind of trending downwards. Income levels kind of flatlined, and just not engaging with the education system going on a secondary level. So, you start thinking about maybe some structural changes, structural solutions, and at least, trying to maybe get some additional attention to the issue, which I feel like in the last handful of years, there has been more attention paid to this issue, which is good. But I think the more light we can shine on it here, the better.
Yeah, actually, that actually, when you talk about structural changes, rather, that's my very next question, coincidentally. So, what are some of the structural changes to education that could help young boys without harming young girls?
So, one that comes to mind is, I have a few. So, there are some potential, what I'll call like radical solutions. So, in that book, of Boys and Men, Dr. Richard Reeves proposes a solution, what's called redshirting the boys, which might be a term that's a little bit more familiar in the U.S. compared to other nations. So, and if it is common for people who might be listening out there, like, forgive me, I don't want to sound like I'm like talking down, but redshirting, just the idea that if the young boy's brain tends to mature a little bit slower than what the young girl's brain does, that instead of putting boys in school based on age, we should do it based on brain development. So we should essentially kind of hold boys back a year or two until their brains have the ability to, or have the developmental, kind of pacing to catch up to where young girls would be. That's a little bit more what I'll call like a radical solution, in that, it's just not maybe the norm of what society's used to. So like, again, here in the US, kind of the norm is when someone hits 5 years old, well, you go to kindergarten, and, we have essentially a system that's all kind of based around ages and enrollment in school. That would certainly kind of throw that off there a little bit. And there are certainly, people out there who maybe, can't necessarily, if you have like a family who has a parent staying home, but maybe that parent staying home creates like an economic issue, then having that parent maybe stay home for an extra year or two, that creates maybe additional economic issues, so they may not be able to do that. That would be one. Again,
yeah.
It's maybe
Matt, can I interject while you're on that point? I just
go for it.
I just want to ask you this question. So, the disparity between the genders, do you think that's inherent or cultural, or a bit of both?
I hate to dodge here. I mean, my best anecdotal knowledge on it is that it's just kind of a more natural brain development. Anecdotally, I think I've witnessed it between, I can look at like my daughters and where they were at certain ages compared to, I have two nephews that are boys compared to where they were at the same age. And, my two girls were, maybe a little bit more like ready for school, at 5 years old compared to, where the boys were at that age. But anyway, I certainly don't want to play the role here of expert in that field. I'm
sorry,
going off of
put you on the spot there.
You're fine.
Continue with the rest of your.
Yeah, so I think kind of more what I'll call like practical issues. I think as a society, trying to encourage more men to get into the education profession. could certainly be one that's out there. So again, this is a U.S.-based statistic, but in the early 1980s, the share of teachers who were male was about 33%. That's now down to about 20%.
Wow.
At primary grade levels, you're looking at about 11% of the teaching force is male. And even within that, a lot of those male teachers in primary grades are what I'll call specialists. They're like PE teachers or music teachers. They're not, kind of like in the classroom. So trying to maybe encourage more men to get into to the profession, just to maybe kind of help build some connections with some of those younger boys. And maybe be able to relate to some of them, and that could also be good for young girls too, to have more men in those schools. So, and I think if you had more men in the teaching profession, that could also then encourage more men to get into, when those kids get older, to get into the teaching profession. Kind of like you have to see it in order to be it, type of thing. Some other ones too, when we talk about kind of encouraging men into the teaching profession, but just maybe encouraging or kind of glamorizing. I'm going to borrow from Dr. Reeves here again, what he calls the HEAL professions. So health, education, literacy, and administration. So typically jobs that aren't necessarily promoted or seen as stereotypical like men's jobs. Try to maybe encourage more men to get into those in a similar way. And I love that this is happening, but in a similar way, like the encouragement of girls to get into science, technology, engineering, and math, get into those STEM fields. And again, I'm a proud father of a daughter who's pursuing the STEM field, and that's fantastic. I would also love to maybe see let's encourage our young boys to get into those HEAL professions. Because if you think about it too, the share of men who are getting into things like psychologists, therapists, like those numbers are also dropping. Well, we also see things like suicide rates for men, being elevated. Would that maybe be a little bit different if we had more men in those fields? Potentially. I'm kind of like speaking anecdotally here. I also think, just maybe being a little bit more mindful for the way that school is set up and organized with curriculums and structures, with, time spent in classrooms for the development of young boys. So I know when my kids were younger in school, they would say like, oh, we had an hour for math, and an hour for math for, let's say, like, I can remember being like, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, like, yeah. I don't know how well I would have done with that. Like, I needed to move and kind of be active. And so maybe just kind of being a little bit more mindful in the way that we set up those schedules and allow for maybe a little bit more break and play and exploration. And again, that potentially could also help out young girls too.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are lots of challenges that both face, and again, at least in North America, it seems that more emphasis are placed on girls' upliftment and not enough on boys, and so we really need to step up our game. So as to get some sort of redress in the situation, and again, not to bring down the other team, but to uplift ours. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to mental health resources and support services, what are available for boys in schools?
So yeah, this will be one that it might depend on where you're at. So like if you're in the United States, it might depend a little bit on the state. Different states might provide different resources. I know here where I live, it's really up to the individual districts what they want to do. There isn't necessarily maybe like a universal program that might be available. I will say in general, I haven't necessarily seen anything like specifically targeted to young boys and young boys only. There are or has been a lot more attention paid to mental health, but it's done on a more universal level. So it's not like, we're just going to focus on like young boys or young girls. It's kind of available to all. So there's been, at least again, kind of where I'm at, a push to pay a lot of attention to social emotional learning, at young ages, like anti-bullying programs at young ages. But those, again, are available across the gender spectrum and not just targeted to young boys. So now, yeah, I've seen a few like examples, reports of what I'll call, I haven't witnessed them specifically, but just kind of stuff I've seen in media, TV, things like that, of what I'll call like, men's clubs, like, sometimes at like religious institutions, they'll have like, men's club or something. And I have seen some of that, but it's not necessarily done during the school day. It's more like an after school club that, people can opt into, and not necessarily something that the school is like themselves sponsoring, but it's just available on school grounds if someone wants to.
Right. So now, how about how does the school promote positive masculinity and challenge traditional gender stereotypes?
Yeah, and it's another one. It probably depends a lot on where you are, and with something like that, it probably depends too on the school leadership and what the school leadership chooses to promote. So I can say with the schools that I've worked at, I haven't necessarily seen like an active promotion with what you speak of. I could say as a staff, with the staff that I've worked at, a lot of these staff members have been great in terms of being, again, in my opinion, positive male role models to not only like staff peers, but also especially to those students. So, it hasn't necessarily been, again, in the places I've been, like an active promotion, like, hey, we want to take this on as an initiative, more of an informal thing.
Right. Now, you mentioned bullying just now, and my next question relates partially to that. What strategies are in place to address bullying and to promote a positive school culture for boys?
Yeah, so with this one, again, here in Oregon, we've had a lot of promotion recently for social emotional learning and trying to make resources available around social and emotional learning, and trying to encourage, and not just boys, but across the gender spectrum, encourage alternative conflict resolution, like, hey, let's think first and not just act first, and go through, self-regulation. What do I need to do in like certain situations and stuff like that. I will say, like, with that though, I mean, schools can only do so much, and they're, once a student leaves school, you're hoping that they are, remembering things that they've learned, but there's also what I'll call like, modern, quote unquote, modern ways of bullying with like, social media. And there are curriculums out there that have been trying to encourage, ways of like a responsible social media use and things. But again, I'd say it really depends a lot on district leadership and what they want to choose to pay attention to, state leadership, what they want to choose to pay attention to as well, or provincial, again, depending maybe on what country you're in and what the structure of the education system is.
Okay, so when it comes to bullying, the advent of social media and whatnot, have you seen, or can you gauge when it comes to cyberbullying, how that is addressed, or the frequency of it where you are?
Yeah, so with the schools I've been in, it maybe isn't chronic and pervasive, but it definitely pops up multiple times throughout the year. And, a lot of times our school can get involved. And again, it might depend a little bit on country laws and things like that, but our schools can get involved if there's a disruption to the educational environment. So if the school can prove that what's going on is going to have further ramifications inside of school and cause issues inside of school and cause others to maybe have their learning disrupted, then they can get involved in those situations. But if they can't necessarily prove that, then it turns into, kind of other stuff that, like, parents would have to handle, at which, if they can't prove it, they can maybe ask parents to step in. But,
Yeah.
I will say that a lot of times schools can prove, they can at least say like, hey, this has the potential to cause an issue.
Right.
If two people are kind of going at it, like, yeah, it's easily understandable that that could spread to the hallway the next day at school.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. When
So a
it
lot of
comes,
times they'll do like try to do like no contact
right.
agreements and thing, which I mean you can do and you can try to enforce those as best you can, but there's only so much oversight you have, and we can't necessarily get into their phones and limit what they do outside of school. So
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to training or professional development opportunities, what are provided for teachers in this regard to address the specific needs of boys?
well, one of the reasons why I wanted to come on with you guys is I haven't really seen any, and so I thought it'd be at least something to at the very least raise some awareness with, that maybe it is at least an issue that could get some attention. I have heard from some elementary colleagues and things like, oh, yeah, the boys, this group of boys in my class and things, and that maybe there should be more attention, either like specific training around how to deal / interact with, or kind of going back to earlier, maybe kind of a reevaluation of some of the time structures and things like that are set up in curriculums and how they're implemented within schools could be done. So I know it's kind of a long way of saying, well, I haven't really seen much of any, but I guess I'll boil it down to that there hasn't been much. So hopefully I'd like to see maybe more attention paid to the issue.
Yeah, because boys are generally the more rambunctious, they're less likely to pay attention, and they need to be reined into a certain degree. And you have to balance that with their natural inclination to be a certain way as boys. So, I mean, I'm not an expert in this. Obviously, that's up to the
Well, in a
professional.
lot of ways too, like it's certainly easier for me to say this right here from my chair than it is maybe in practice if this was like a first or second grade classroom. But I've had peers who are male elementary teachers, and they've talked about like trying to use some of the rambunctiousness, quote, to your advantage, that there are
Right,
maybe some
right.
tips and tricks and things like that you can do. Hey, like if you get this answer right, we'll say it's nice weather, if you get this answer right, like we're going to put this group and you're going to like race to the fence and back, something like really fast, kind of get out some energy and then come back and kind of refocus from there. So like there are some ways of doing that, but I know, at least again here in the US, sometimes there can be like pretty restrictive restraints on times, like, hey, we have to have like this amount of time because we have limited staffing resources, and the help that's coming in for math is only going to be here for this time, and so we kind of have to get all this done at once. But that kind of gets back to some of those larger structural issues.
Okay, well, we're running out of time, but I have a couple other questions. So we'll try to get through as much as we can.
Okay.
If we run over a couple of minutes, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, you're free to, answer the questions accordingly.
Yeah.
How does the school encourage parental involvement in the education of boys?
Well, again, I'll kind of hedge here a little bit in saying that it probably depends a lot on leadership and where you're at. I know like some of the principals that I've been around, like some have done a good job in terms of like, as the question said, like, really, hammering home the idea of getting parents involved, and also, maybe doing some at-home training that, you might not necessarily be able to control that schedule like we talked about. And so just kind of letting the child know some expectations that this is going to be how it is, and this is how we want to see you behave, and and maybe try to work with the school. But yeah, I'd say a lot of it really just kind of depends on district leadership. Like at least here in the U.S., like there's so much local control as
Right.
opposed to maybe some other places where maybe there is a little bit more of either kind of provincial or federal oversight.
Okay. What support systems are in place for boys who are struggling academically?
Yeah, so that's a good one. I'll address this here in a couple different ways. So a lot of times what will happen, at least from what I've seen and talking with some of my peers who work in the primary grades, is at younger ages, if a boy is struggling, a lot of times what will happen is they'll try to find the male teacher on staff and try to
Right.
make that male teacher like the role model, which sometimes the male, sometimes they want to do that. But I've also talked with some colleagues too, like, well, I don't really want that. Like, I don't want to just be kind of like the go-to, anytime there's an issue, it just kind of gets thrown on me to kind of figure this out. So that's one that I've seen, quite common, especially at some of those younger ages. Unfortunately as well, and this might be more of a US thing.
Right.
I've seen a lot of times where you start getting into talk about like, attention deficit hyperactivity. Maybe they should be tested, maybe they should be looked at and things like that. And then sometimes maybe things like, special ed services might get brought up. Maybe they might be, kind of tested for things surrounding that, which, potentially can help. I'm not trying to like at all in any way discount that, potentially can help. But, at least from my experience, it seems like sometimes that is one of the, kind of early go-tos as far as like a support, which again, there can be support there. With that. But as far as like a robust system, haven't necessarily seen, but, to be fair too, I haven't necessarily seen a robust system, either for girls that works, on their end. Here in Oregon, we do have a system called Ninth Grade on Track, which is, focusing more on like secondary level, but trying to put in academic interventions, root cause interventions. Are there like executive function issues that are maybe going on that we can maybe kind of work with and train and things to help the students succeed. So there maybe have been a little bit more formal ones that I've seen on a secondary level there too. So
Okay. Well, we have one final question for you, but before I get to that question, I just want to throw some information about our organization. There are no limits to gender, age, nationality, or ethnic groups. All walk of life can participate in any of our shows. If you want to be a guest on any of our shows or willing to be part of our organization and help us directly or indirectly, please reach out to us. We would love to work with individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials, and businesses. Our phone number here is 226-289-8784. Email is at info@voiceofmen360.org. Our website is www.voiceofmen360.org. And you can find us on pretty much all social media. We also have a Facebook group page. Please join our group and you can see our daily activities, and also please invite your friends. Other social media platforms where you can find us are Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Voice of Men 360. We would really appreciate that. So we have been speaking here to Matt Ciaffoni. It's been a very informative and engrossing half an hour, a little bit more. And unfortunately, time has sort of run out on us. So Matt, finally, can you tell us a little bit more about yourselves and how someone can contact you or your organization regarding what you're proposing to do on behalf of men and boys, or boys rather, sorry.
Yeah. So again, just briefly, if anyone didn't catch it there at the start, so I've been in secondary education here for the last 20 years. And it's kind of a weird set of circumstances here in that right now I am working for an organization called the Willamette Education Service District here in Oregon in the United States. We provide services for districts that maybe can't do those on their own. One of my initiatives that I was kind of spearheading was trying to, just again, kind of call attention, maybe come up with some potential ideas for solutions for young boys within the region that our education service district works with. I will say, as I didn't get brought up in the beginning, I really do miss teaching though. And so I actually just the other day took a teaching job. So I won't be in the position anymore, but I'll be back in the world of teaching, which is really kind of where my heart lies, and can be more excited to get back in it. So
Yeah, well, that would be fantastic. So,
but I still would love to, hopefully have someone carry the torch here and continue to pay attention, because there's a lot of good work. One last one I do want to throw out here too.
sure.
Here in Oregon, as far as maybe some things helping out young boys, we've seen a tremendous investment in career technical education programs,
Right.
and those have actually paid some really, really big dividends. There's within our organization, the Willamette Education Service District, we actually have a full CTE high school where students can enroll in and go to, and they can actually leave that high school with certifications and a variety of different career fields. And so for both boys and girls who may be like, hey, a 4-year university path isn't necessarily something that I'm interested in, we've seen tremendous enthusiasm for those types of programs where it's more kind of like hands-on, and the students know like, hey, when I leave here, like I'm gonna have something I can immediately go out and get a job. So they offer a variety of different certifications and things, and so hopefully we can see further investment into to those types of things to maybe hit some of those kids where maybe like they don't necessarily have that interest in like a 4-year university plan like I did, but they have those outlets that they can turn to.
Oh, very good. So thank you so much, Matt Ciaffoni, for this invaluable input that you've extended to us, to the audience out there. We really appreciate your time, and we wish you all success in this important drive that you have going on in Oregon there. So thanks again, Matt. For all of us here at Voice of Men 360, we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you also to Sivam. He's behind the scenes. You can't see him, but he's doing an important job as well at the controls. So from all of us here at Voice of Men 360, have yourself a wonderful evening, morning, night, wherever you are. Thank you, and goodbye from us.
Thank you.